My childhood dog showed back up to my house after 30 years, Part 2. A story by user Luther writes horror. My mother thinks it's a miracle. Yesterday my childhood dog showed up at my house after having disappeared 30 years ago, and I've been trying to figure out what is happening and what it means. To say I'm unsettled would be an understatement. I'm not on the best terms with my mother. We never had the best relationship, but she's been pushing boundaries really terribly ever since my son was born. She'll show up out of the blue demanding to spend time with him, demanding grandmother privileges without giving us any heads up or letting us prepare ourselves for company. She'll take things from the house without asking. She tried to bully us into letting her move in, that sort of thing. It doesn't bug me terribly, maybe because I'm used to it, but my wife has been on the verge of blowing up and banning her from our house for months. So when I called her up to tell her about this dog that I could swear was Shadow, I should have braced for the worst. She practically broke down the door, rushing over to our house in a matter of minutes. I couldn't think of any distinguishing characteristics other than his dichromatic eyes, and the fact that I'd never seen a dog that looked quite like him, but my mother remembered that Shadow had a missing toe on his left front paw, and we were always curious as to what had happened. Sure enough, this returned Shadow was missing the same toe. On that note, my mother has never been the least bit religious, but I think Shadow turning up after all these years is triggering some sort of conversion. It must be a sign. God wants us to have another shot with him, she said. You're religious now? I asked. This is proof of something, isn't it? Your childhood dog, your best friend, has returned after 30 years to protect your son. That's incredible. For once, she and my wife finally agree on something: we're keeping Shadow. I'm leery as all hell about it, and what scares me more than anything is just how comfortable he's making everyone else around him. Last night my wife and mother were watching television and eating popcorn with Shadow curled up at their feet. I swear, I haven't seen them more at peace together than in that moment, and even I have to admit it makes me feel bad that I'm trying to deprive them of that, but there is something unnatural about this whole ordeal. Something bad. It's like nobody is listening to reason. Those hairs on the back of your neck that stand up from some signal deep in the mammalian brain that tell you something is very wrong. Get out of this situation now, alarm bells are going off. It feels like I'm the only one who has them in this family. Apparently he showed up at our door while I was at work yesterday, and my wife brought him in to get him a snack and some water. She's a dog person, so seeing the majestic animal panting at our doorstep, she naturally trusted him and let him in. You brought in a wild animal with our infant son in the house? I asked, honestly flabbergasted. He's not some wild wolf or something. He's a dog, and very obviously a good one at that. I could just tell. I remembered back to childhood, that gruff voice that came from Shadow detailing each gory moment of the scene that would happen if he chose to rip out my sister's throat, the flesh torn open, the blood drenching the cartoon pillowcase, the splatter on her curtains as he shook her windpipe like a dead rat. I looked at him, and the way he looked at me was as if he knew. Every moment he's in this house I'm going to be afraid of what he'll do. I told her. He's a good dog. Your mom says you were inseparable from him when you were a kid. What's changed? Why is nobody listening to me? He was possessive of me, but I was always terrified of him. I don't want him in our house, I said. You're being so irrational about this, she said. Irrational? I'm sorry. I'm not convinced a dog can be 37 years old. My brain's not some cabinet of horrors. I get that I have the reputation in my family as still being some sort of imaginative child, even though all that stopped 30 years ago, but it feels to me that these red flags I'm seeing everywhere are pretty obvious. Honestly, the worst thing is that after never being civil to each other for 6.5 years, my wife and mother are abruptly best friends. My wife even invited my mother to come stay with us for a while. My wife and I were in the kitchen after dinner when she brought the idea up. I had been drying a plate and it slipped out of my hands and broke on the floor. An extra pair of hands around the house won't hurt. An extra pair of hands and a drooling more, I said. The dog looked up at me and I felt like it grabbed my voice. I cleaned up the broken plate, downcast. The moment she brought it up I knew I'd already lost that argument. I've been burning through overtime at work to pay for childcare, but that's left so much extra housework for my wife that it's really not fair to her for me to argue on this. We need the help. So in addition to worrying about this demon dog or whatever Shadow is, I'm having to move everything out of my office to make my mother a guest room, and the emotional dynamic of my marriage has completely shifted overnight. Most of the things in my office I don't really use. I carried the files downstairs, and had started the laborious project of trying to disassemble my wire shelves when I heard my son babbling in the other room. He was never this talkative. I came into my son's room as the sun was dipping below the window and bathing the room in golden light. Shadow was there, but this time he was standing on his hind legs, almost as if he was human. His hair puffed up and he looked powerful, regal, wise. He stood there gazing at my son. "No," I said. "Go back to where you came from. I don't want you here." When he turned to look at me, his eyes burned into mine with an intense stare. They reached into me and grabbed hold of something they found inside me. I couldn't move. An unbelievable feeling of calm washed over me, and I left the room as though my body was on marionette strings. As soon as I closed the door, my paternal instincts took back over, and I was immediately terrified that something was happening to my son. I yanked the door back open, dreading the worst. What if the beast had carried him off, had taken him to some dark hole we would never find to eat his tender body? What if he'd come back again from some rotten hell to take everything from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop him? But when the door flew open, Shadow was sitting there as a regular dog, wagging his tail while my son said nonsense syllables to him. But that wasn't real. Something was off. It was like the scene was only in my imagination. My eyes, they weren't even open. How could what I was seeing be real if my eyes weren't even open? I focused with everything I had. My body felt like it was moving through wet concrete. If I didn't shuck it off right now, it would solidify and I wouldn't be able to regain control again. I focused, even as something pushed back. I pushed with all my will to open my eyes and see what was actually happening in front of me. I dredged up every ounce of courage I had against that beast. Every ounce of resentment for the things he did to me in childhood. I remembered how he made me, an innocent little boy, push my sister down the stairs, how I'd never recovered my relationship with her. No, I thought. I am an adult now, not some little boy who is constantly afraid. I will see. I will, I told myself. My eyes snapped open. I saw Shadow standing upright, bipedal, his back long, and straight, and strong, and he was holding my son, the back of his Odyssey caught on that animal's teether. He looked at me with golden eyes, stared into me, but I refused to budge. I refused to let him back into me even an inch. I realized he was frozen too. For some reason he couldn't move while he was trying to exert his will over me. My son wriggled and I knew he was destined to fall any moment. I pushed through the room, every step heavy and exhausting. I grabbed my son out of Shadow's mouth and wrenched him free, and I backed out of the room. As soon as I was free of the room, I regained full control of my body and dashed down the stairs holding my infant son. I was going to get us out of this, no matter what my wife and mother thought. I heard my wife's voice call out to me from the kitchen as I was nearly out the door. "You cannot leave with him. He is not your son anymore. Shadow will be a better father to him than you could ever be. Shadow can keep him safe." It was my wife's voice, but those weren't her words. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what, but even if she was deranged enough to claim Shadow was my son's father, she wouldn't have used those words. "He's done something to you. You have to resist. You have to break free." My mother came out of the kitchen carrying a pair of scissors as if they were knives, smiling. "I'm so sorry," I muttered. "I'm sorry I'm leaving you to him, but I have to make sure our son is safe. I'll be back for you. I promise." I slammed the door and leapt in the car. In my bedroom window I saw Shadow watching me. I didn't even want to know what his next move would be. I drove until I was tired of driving and pulled into a parking lot to think and type this up. My son is sleeping in the car seat. For the moment, we're safe, but where we can go from here, I have no idea.
That is the second part of this story. What kind of creature Shadow really is? What did he do to control the wife and the mother of our protagonist? What is he going to do now that his wife and mother are possessed by Shadow? To know more on what will happen next, share and subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the updates from us. And also, kindly like and share this video and comment down below on what you think will be the fate of our protagonist and his son. This is the Double Dutchman, and we thank you for your support to our channel. We'll see you on our next episode.